Well, good morning, everybody. As we start off this new week, I wanted to begin with some satellite data from Sunday. And what I'm looking for here is just to see how much snow is underneath the moving clouds. And you can see coming out of parts of Idaho and Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and parts of Montana, that you extend the snowpack into parts of Nebraska and Kansas. And Kansas was really, as we watched the end of this forecast last week evolve, really just took the brunt of the snowstorm. A lot of places in here picking up well over 8 inches of snow. And we can even see a little bit of it here in the parts of Missouri, Iowa, and tucked into underneath the clouds here in Illinois and Wisconsin. Meanwhile, across the southeast, a decent shield of precipitation did move through. And again, this is an area we've been watching very carefully for droughts. And it was also interesting to watch the extent of the fog that was in parts of the Pacific Northwest, specifically, this side, this whole eastern half of Washington. Temperatures were actually cold enough there to get some freezing fog out of that. Now let's go take a look at the snowfall totals. Now this was through 6 p.m. Central Time last night, so of course we've added more since then. But remember last week we had this pretty well pinned down by the time I gave my last forecast on Wednesday, but the models really allowed this system to develop in their forecasts that it certainly verified hitting this part of Texas and Oklahoma and getting right into the heart of Kansas here with quite a bit of heavy snowfall. Temperatures are going to rebound pretty quickly, so this is going to melt. In fact, could you see it there in the animation? Watch as I go back earlier in the day. You can see the snow, like keep an eye right here. And then as we go toward later in the day, we're already seeing some of that snow melting in that area. But this delivered some moisture into this region, which was really desperately needed given that we're still in drought conditions there. Since the beginning of the month, this is our precipitation ranks by climate district. And overall, we kind of just hone in on those really, really dry spots in parts of the Mississippi and Ohio basin into this area. And we can clearly see a lot of places having a top 5 or top 3 driest Novembers on record. We're going to talk more about this at the end with respect to El Nino. Our latest drought monitor released on the 22nd continues to show pretty expansive drought throughout the Midwest, the Southwest, and then while we've had some correction throughout Texas over the last couple of months after just an excruciatingly hot and dry summer, this is the area that I'm watching to see get some serious relief, not just now, but in the longer term as well. We have brought in some good moisture into parts of the south and southeast as of late, but so much is still needed to undo kind of the long-standing drought, especially in parts of Louisiana and Mississippi. Looking at our latest soil moisture data, this only goes down 16 inches, so this is a percentile map. It's just to point out again how dry things are in throughout the Midwest, Great Lakes, getting down to lower Mississippi River Valley, and pockets of the plains. Now, we think about this because as we go through winter, it's often very difficult to recover soil moisture. So what needs to happen is we need to prolong the really, really deep set-in of cold air across the Midwest as long as we can to keep the subsurface soil unfrozen and the topsoil unfrozen as well, so that any moisture that gets in here can help relieve some of this problem. But if this does not change by the time we get into spring, then this is going to be another major story for 2024. Now, that's a long time from now, so I'm just telling you, I'll watch it and keep you posted on these things. But this also helps influence what's going on with the Mississippi River, which this morning here on the 27th, at about 5 a.m., was 5 feet above low stage. So we did make a quick little bounce after hitting about 9 feet below low stage last week, and hopefully we'll continue to see this river level continue to rise. Okay, looking at the last 72 hours of total accumulated precip, it is a reminder that in that snow there's not much liquid. Now there's decent amounts here coming out of parts of Oklahoma and Kansas, but the rest of us that got a little bit of snow, just understand that 10-to-1 ratio means a lot. So you notice there's just not a whole lot of liquid that came out of this. But do note the heavier rains that hit from basically in and around New Orleans, all through the Gulf Coast down here in parts of Alabama, getting over into the Panhandle and then into southern Georgia. Desperately needed rainfall in this particular area. And as we look at it today, I think the attention is going to go rightly to the Great Lakes. Not a whole lot going on around the rest of the country. They got major temperature changes, but we'll get to those in a minute. But as this system leaves this morning, it's going to be the attention here on the winds that are going to cut across these very, very warm lakes. And as that occurs, we're on the lookout here for some decent lake effect snow. Before we get to that, though, I just want to show you that the last 14 days in terms of precipitation anomalies does show broad areas of the country still dealing with extremely dry conditions. In the Northwest, which settled into a pattern over the last 2 weeks of having some ridging just here over British Columbia, has also gone over drier. So we're going to watch for these things to change here in this pattern because we need to break away from kind of this setup. Okay, every time we get flow coming in like this, remember it's convergent on this side, which is dry. It misses most of the west, which is we're in the wet season. We need to have better flow coming into the west. And the split meant that more of the momentum came into like the Baja or even into Mexico before riding here along the southern tier of the United States. So this is a pattern I'd like to see really shift and move around. And I think we're going to get some help. The help's going to come from two spots. I think the first one's going to be Greenland, and the second's going to be what's going to happen in and around Alaska and the Gulf of Alaska. So let's go ahead and stitch that together. The Greenland side of this first. We've looked a lot at the Pacific North American pattern lately, but I want to take you to the North Atlantic now. And we're going to look at what's called the North Atlantic Oscillation. And what we watch for again here, it's just an index, is we look for the value. Now, every time we get these really negative North Atlantic Oscillation values, what this is symbolic of is a pressure change over Greenland, specifically ridge building over Greenland. And there's a lot of folks up the East Coast that would want nothing more than to see this on repeat from now till March. Because if we just kept getting these deep, drops in the North Atlantic Oscillation, it tends to be more supportive of East Coast storm systems, nor'easters as an example. Now, that'll really be the case later in the year and then the start of the new year. But I want to let you know that when we start to see this bounce around down here, it really means a change in the North Atlantic circulation. So if you'd like to see it, here we go. Let's look right down on the top of the Northern Hemisphere. And playing through Tuesday into Wednesday, see this ridge building in here? This is what we're talking about. So later in the year, when you get a ridge that kind of builds into this area, it just allows for deeper troughs of low pressure to develop and roll up the East Coast. Now you say, what's the most ideal situation if you're an East Coast snow lover? Put a big ridge into Alaska, a large ridge here into Greenland, so that the flow has to come around it. It then dives into the U.S. like this and is forced to make this hard turn to come back up like that. That kind of flow is a snow lover and cold lover dream. I mean, that's what you want. So we're missing part of it, the Alaska part of it, but the Greenland ridge is going. And even to make it more ideal, pull it a little bit farther to the south. I want to get high pressure over the Hudson Bay or parts of Quebec, and then we're in business up the East Coast. But as it stands, as we go into Thursday, I'm not going to be watching the East Coast. I'm going to be watching this wave right here. Coming out of New Mexico into Texas, this one on Thursday has the look that might draw on a little bit of instability and increase the risk of severe storms in the southern plains. This will be Thursday night, getting into early Friday morning. It's that wave right there. It doesn't look like much, does it? But that's the one. We then play out here toward Friday into Saturday and Sunday. And we're going to keep an eye on this part of the jet stream here. This looks to be a pretty robust wave, sending a system through the midsection of the country by next weekend or early next week. And behind it, okay, we got another trough in the Gulf of Alaska. Oops, sorry about that. Right in through here. And this Greenland ridge is quite expansive overall in its position. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned, but we need to talk about at the end again, is take a look at Europe. Trapped inside of a deeper trough here, they're going to be experiencing several days of very cold conditions, which remember, nearly every long-range forecast for Europe for this winter is warm. So that's something to be watching for, the colder conditions that are coming right into that area. That's only a week out. We keep going with this forecast. I really don't like where it lands about day 10 because we have the trough. I like troughs coming into the west. But overall, we get the flow coming back over the top like this. So that, again, is convergent flow. And just every time I say that, sorry if that isn't clear, that convergence is a loft, which means high pressure, sinking air, dry conditions. The fun will be on the southern side of it, down here, and then anything that kind of comes up the East Coast. So that's where I think we're going to see our best flow across the country. The Northwest gets a little bit of it as well. So to put all that together, let's just say next 10 days, who's got the moisture and who doesn't. So this is the probability of getting an inch of total liquid equivalent precipitation over the next 10 days. So it's highest down here across the south, but some does move into the mid-south and into the Ohio Valley. We desperately need this. And the west begins to pick up, again, the Pacific Northwest, begins to pick up with better flow here pretty soon as well. On the drier side of it, this is the chance of staying under a ½ inch. And again, a lot of it, the Canadian Prairie, the northern plains, the southwest, and even the southern tip of Florida. Remember, after all the flooding they had recently, they've gone back over dry as well. So those two maps really kind of, I think, explain where this precipitation pattern is going. But I got all these tabs to get into the details. And again, I'll release a short video after this for those of you that don't have much time. But today we're going to talk about the coasts, the east and west, primarily with the risk of lake effect snow here, getting into this system that's moving up the east coast, and then very cold morning temperatures again this morning in the Central Valley of California. I saw some of the observations here dipping well below 32 degrees Fahrenheit in this area. So these freeze warnings were definitely warranted in this region. Midsection of the country, not a whole lot going on. And one of the big reasons for that is that the flow is just it's coming from the northwest. So the lakes are warm. We're going to have plenty of cold air blowing across the Great Lakes. This sets up what we call wind parallel lake effect snow bands coming off of Superior and Michigan and Huron. But Erie and Ontario end up getting what we call shore parallel bands. And those are the type of bands that tend to produce extremely heavy snows right in these two areas that I'm kind of painting in through here. So if we go ahead and have a look at it, I was already spending some time here. Take a look. Starting at 6 o'clock this morning, system leaves, still some snow into parts of Maine, but you'll just watch the model kick off. Look at these extended, kind of tendrils here of lake effect snow throughout the day today into tonight, and then again into tomorrow. And there's a little frontal boundary that slides out of parts of Manitoba into Ontario, and that one's going to clip this part of the Great Lakes states as well, bringing in a little bit of enhancement at the very end of this as we work our way out toward middle of the day on Wednesday. So lake effect snow in those areas could be relatively high. In fact, the high-res NAM, just look how much it's adding here. Got a couple of spots that are showing up way up high in the color bar. Don't be surprised too if you get a little right here along the spine of the Appalachian Mountains. But I wanted to zoom in and have a quick look at these snowfall totals from the National Digital Forecast Database. So this goes out to Thursday morning. And again, we could have a few areas in through here that are picking up well over a foot, possibly some places over 30 inches of snow coming off the end of Lake Ontario. And you can see right in through this area where the elevation change also enhances some of that. So watch Erie and watch Ontario for our biggest snowfall events here. Outside of that, I just got to keep watching where that jet enters the west and what that ridge in Greenland's going to do. So this week, Wednesday, it's going to be the tail end of rather weaker flow right here coming out of, again, New Mexico and Texas. Is going to kick off the risk of severe storms Thursday night. Look at that little shortwave right there. And then after that, look at the flow coming across the Pacific. It's going to target the Pacific Northwest. This weekend, we're going to get a broader low that develops in the midsection of the country this weekend. And then on Sunday, this one's going to be producing a pretty decently sized system through the midsection of the United States. And then we'll watch after that for the flow to go back into northwest flow coming across the central part of the U.S. with split flow in parts of the west. We've seen that kind of time in and time again. So multi-model analysis. GFS left, European right. We've already seen through Tuesday here and into Wednesday. As we approach Wednesday, there's a weak low off the coast of California in both models that sneaks through and brings in a little bit of precip. As it comes through, it ends up ending right here over parts of Arizona, New Mexico, adding in some decent chances of some snow. This is now Thursday morning. That same wave comes out Thursday evening, and you can see both models kind of honing in on this region for the risk of those strong to severe storms. So it's not yet fully in the Storm Prediction Center forecast. It's because we're out there on Thursday looking at this, but they've been discussing it, and I think we have enough instability coming in this area that I would just be watching from the Mississippi River back to the Red River Valley and then south to the Gulf, talking about this whole eastern side of Texas here. Now that's the system on Thursday. As we play through into early Friday morning, Friday midday here, and getting ourselves into Friday evening, that's going to try to spread east. The GFS is quicker to curl this system up into a larger low going up the east coast, but the European model is a little slower here on Saturday. Meanwhile, you saw the changes coming in the Pacific Northwest, much stronger flow there. And watch the low that comes out from Saturday night. Here it is, there's Saturday night into Sunday morning. Now, this is the low that in the European model is substantial. It's got good dynamics to it. It's got a bit of a forward tilt. It's curled up pretty hard here. And as a result, by noon on Sunday, we're going to be watching, a pretty large system in the midsection of the country. Meanwhile, remember, we're still targeting the Northwest with good flow. So the whole of the Northwest piling up some snow in the Sierra Nevada, piling up in the Cascades. And we're going to watch both of these systems early next week. So there's Sunday night, getting into Monday morning. Look at the European model really curling up a deep low going here into parts of New England. You notice it's not really there in the GFS, all right? And the GFS is a bit drier in the forecast than the European. I'm just rocking back and forth over next Sunday into Monday. But we're going to watch this carefully just for the potential for a system here next weekend. Pacific Northwest really does add it up, though, which is good. So we take a look at the total precip. This is now getting into Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. There's that system rolling through. And you'll notice as I take it all the way out to day 10, now you can see the heavier precip here, which we saw in the ensembles, and also in the Pacific Northwest. There's our drier corridor there and in parts of the Southwest. This is what the GFS is holding for the next 7 days, but if we take it out to 10 days, sorry, let's get a quick update on that. There we go. Take this out to 10 days, we end up seeing this is the total precip outlook. So similar in some regard, a bit wetter here throughout parts of the Midwest than the European model is. Okay, total snowfall. I'm just going to use the European just to get a handle on this. We've already seen the lake effect here. Once the flow begins to return into the southwest on Wednesday night, this is where, well, really Wednesday throughout the day, but Wednesday evening, we're going to keep an eye on the snow starting to add up here. It continues there until Thursday. We then see better flow coming into the west late this week into weekend. Look at the snowfall adding up here in parts of the Cascades, a little bit in the Sierra Nevada, some of the northern Rockies. And then we'll watch to see if that system that comes out next Sunday, Monday, adds some snow into parts of Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and then we'll see a bigger snowfall amount getting added up here into parts of the Canadian Maritimes coming out of Ontario into Quebec. Okay, probabilities again. There's your drier side of things overall. We're going to look again at who's going to get really quite wet. So there's the chance of 1 inch, and then here's 2 inches. So heaviest rains down here where we're dealing with our greatest drought extent. So I like to see that. What about week 2? Well, that's that time period where we go back into this flow. And that's convergent in this area, better in the northwest. We'll see stuff coming around the south side of this, but that's why the week 2 precipitation forecasts are wet northwest, all 3 of them, and wet across the south up the east coast. Convergence and drier in the central United States. On the temperature side of it, we started off talking about the cold conditions here in the Central Valley of California, so you can see where we're expecting that frost, but there's a lot of cold air in the south and southeast right now. Take a look. We're expecting a frost all the way down to the panhandle of Florida. Today's high temperatures are pretty chilly as well, so take a look at that. We're going to be struggling to get out of the 50s down in the south, and we're going to stay well below freezing throughout much of the Midwest and Great Lakes and Northern Plains. The west is the most mild, and we're going to see a quick rebound in temperatures here on Tuesday in the Northern Plains as the cold air exits east. There's by Wednesday getting into Thursday, so a brief mild shot of air here getting into Friday and Saturday this week. And you're going to see the pattern kind of favor a little bit cooler conditions west-southwest and more mild air trying to come in late this week as the next system begins to gather on Sunday right here in the central United States. Taking a look at that 5-day sliding window of temperatures, there's your next 5 days. Here's that mild air coming in day 5 through 10. And then day 10 through 15, we just see most of the models trying to flood a lot of the country with more mild conditions. And I've watched the trends and analyzed them, and I don't think they're significant enough to really mention here, but we're just looking at the overall pattern, kind of the over-under actually, right? So it's warmer or cooler or wetter or drier. And we see out there to week 2 quite a bit of mild air to start the month of December. And we question if that's going to last a while. We say, well, how much of an influence is El Nino having on this? El Nino has been continuing to build, but it's missing a critical component. You see, normally our strongest El Ninos, we've mentioned this several times, have warm water everywhere to the east of that line. So you have the North Pacific reflection of it, and then you have the equatorial Pacific El Nino event. Well, right now we have a negative Pacific decadal oscillation, negative Pacific meridional mode. And that's atypical. Normally, El Nino and the PDO tend to work together. In this case, they're working against one another. And I would make a case that that's what's limiting the strength of this El Nino. I was looking at it this morning. It's 1.57 degrees above Celsius above average. And most models by this point in the season already had it pegged at 2.5 degrees. So we're nowhere close to what this was forecast to be. And we know that this El Nino is likely going to peak in the next, let's call it 60 days. Some point in December or January, it's likely going to reach its peak and begin to fade. Now, I showed you at the beginning, it was like 15 minutes ago, so far, the month of November, the precipitation stats. And every time we've had an El Nino since 1960, we've tended to be a bit drier, not overly so, but a bit drier in the Midwest, wet across the south, wet up the East Coast, drier Northwest, wet California. Now, I think it's this tab right here. We were drier in the Midwest, not historically not record dry, but we can't really say we were too wet up the coast, and California wasn't. So when I look at this and I say, well, how much of this is really being driven by, there it is, by El Nino? And I just have to say that El Nino's got an influence on the pattern, but I don't think it is the most dominant influence on the pattern. And here's some more evidence of that. If we were in a full-blown El Nino, between these two lines I just drew, you'd see solid red, indicating strong westerly wind bursts. But instead, we're not really getting that. The Pacific trade winds aren't locked into El Nino as the only dominant teleconnection that we've got right now. So if we said, well, what about those same years? What did December do? Well, it was a bit drier across the west, wet coming out of the mid-south to midwest, wet across the south, a little drier, and parts of the Ohio Valley getting into the Appalachian Mountains. But, this is not a strong signal. So you start to blend together El Nino years and say December can be quite a volatile month overall. And I mention that because of a couple other competing factors. This year's El Nino is dealing with the Pacific Decadal Oscillation being in its negative phase. So because of that, that's not giving us that typical El Nino flavor to the weather patterns. And if you say, well, what does the PDO do? Well, if the PDO, remember, which is negative right now, that would make this whole area wet, much of the Pacific Northwest wet, and we'd be drier in Texas and drier across the South. Yet most models are not predicting that, even our own government. Okay, so you take a look at their forecast, they're wet across the whole southern tier of the U.S., but drier north. They're more mild north with cooler conditions in the southeast. And so therefore, I know a lot of folks over the last 5 days have made some pretty strong projections about what the upcoming winter is going to look like. I'm sure you probably see them on social media or, however you get your weather information. But I just tell you, I don't think anything's settled at all. I haven't yet to see a dominant factor come out of the Atlantic. The Pacific jet has been so variable. The subtropical jet's been in Mexico at times before it comes into the southern part of the United States. So I would just tell you that making long-range projections, just understand that when anyone does this time of year for the rest of winter, it's speculative. Okay, that's all. That's good. That's what we do. So nothing to really worry much about there. So what I need to finish with is a bit of an international update. And I want to start with this map looking down here in South America. This is a Vegetation Health Index map compared to a year ago. So major degradation in the health index, vegetation health index across a big section of Brazil, specifically this northeastern corner. But where all that wet weather's been, it's kind of got into the Paraná River Basin, which runs through here. In fact, it starts way up there. And this is an area that's seen some significant improvement over a year ago. Take a look at a couple other places. Look at Southern Africa, very, very dry, and we're starting to see the effects of that in Australia. Although there's better rains in the forecast here, they would have much preferred the La Nina of last year. But coming back to Brazil, I want to show you the latest 1-month drought monitor, and you can see here that over the last month, we've hit Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, Tocantins. This area has been hit pretty hard with extreme heat at times and very dry conditions, while southern Brazil continues to flood. That's all these maps just continue to convey in that information. And as we look out over the next week, there was a bit of a model battle over the weekend, and we can discuss that all we want, but I want to show you the European first. Still wet south, better rains into Argentina. But the European model is a bit more generous as we play through the beginning of December with rainfall getting into southern Mato Grosso do Sul, Goiás, Minas Gerais, these areas. So it's showing a better overall look at the precip. So if I give you a 15-day forecast from it, it's driest pretty far to the north. Maybe we would call this less than 20% of the growing area for Brazil showing up dry. But the GFS ensemble, just to kind of show it to you, let's go down to their 16-day anomaly map. It's a bit more expansive on that, more into the Amazon, but it's certainly got more of Mato Grosso in, maybe 30 to 35% of the growing area, maybe a bit more than that, showing up with drier conditions. So the GFS has been a drier model for a while, and I just wanted to point out about the same forecast south, but north, much more expansive, and it's continued to be that way over the last 5 days, in fact. So as we go forward, maybe we look a little bit international, just to kind of finish this up. And I want to point out in this temperature anomaly map how cold Europe is right now. Now, there's something to be said for Europe's winter being dominated by the very warm ocean conditions coming in the Atlantic. I think it's going to be a highly volatile winter throughout Europe because of that. So you're going to have this competition between things like the polar vortex strength, or what's going on in the Arctic oscillation here, or the North Atlantic ridging over Greenland like we're seeing now, and at times what that could do into Europe. That is something that can happen during an El Nino year. But just take a look around the rest of the country before I flip it over to precip, and you see it's still another stormy week. A lot of heavy snows coming into parts of Central Europe. But take a look at those other places. Wet in this part of Africa in the rainforest, dry in South Africa, wetter in India, Southeast Asia, Malaysia, a lot of places here, and this whole kind of eastern half of Australia showing up wetter, from the Northern Territory, over here to Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria. Even parts of New Zealand showing up a bit wetter as well. So we'll keep an eye on this. And finally, just want to give you one last update. I'm curious to hear about more expertise in this than I have. There has been, let me show you at the top, there has been better rains as of late over here in this side of Panama, but the Panama Canal is right here, okay? And if you look over the last 3 months, that's where we've had our most extensive drought. And I was just looking at, again, one of my favorite sites, marinetraffic.com, and this is the lake we have to keep an eye on. This is the lake that's been low. And I was just curious, like what, I don't know, let's click on a random ship here. That one here has been at anchor. Oh, it's underway. It's finally using its engine. But, some of these other ones here have just been at anchor for a while. I don't know what that one is. But it's just a fun website to play around with here. This one's at anchor, big Cape Quest container ship. So we'll watch that for you as well. But thanks for sticking around for the long video. We'll record the short one next and get that information out to you. Have a good rest of your week. Thanks.